Group, and this is your end of day as well as end of week market recap for Friday, the what is today, the 21st of June, and we only have one more week to go for the month. So it's gonna, the way that the week or excuse me, the way that the month ends, today's the 21st, and then because the way that the week lines up, the 28th will be the last trading day of the month, and that's Friday. So we're almost through a whole nother trading month, and then after that, the first of the month will be on July 1st. So just like that, June is almost wrapped up here. So quadruple witching, or triple witching as they call it now, finished for the day. Some interesting moves, towards the end of the day. It's always to me a bit interesting, what side that you could be on. For instance, you got long some Amazon today, and that rallied into the close. So thank you very much for the index rebalance gods. There was also this huge rebalance that they were talking about with the XLK ETF, the largest technology ETF, Amazon being reweighted up, and Apple being reweighted down. This was explained. I think that they try to do a good job on CNBC explaining, because the market cap for Apple and NVIDIA is very similar, and that's a market cap weighted ETF, but there are some restrictions in terms of how large positions can be, kind of really in the weeds, but it didn't make a ton of sense to me how Apple has to be smaller. And NVIDIA could be larger. So I understand like that these names are getting very large in the indices, but I don't understand how one can be larger than the other, and it's no problem. In any event, Apple sold off a little bit into the close, and NVIDIA really didn't move at all. So perhaps there's just a lot of other flows going on. So risk disclaimer in front of you. Everything that we're going through in this video is for information purpose only, not giving any advice or recommendations. Everything that we're going through is for information purposes only. So again, like I think overall, like a pretty choppy triple witching. Not much movement. SPY finished down about 0.5%. Qs finished down 0.25%. IWM actually outperformed a little bit, up 20 basis points. The Dow, not much follow through from yesterday. So overall, when you look at these indices and the reversal day that happened yesterday, a little bit further downside, which I think is expected. I think also, you'll probably hear me mention this a couple times as I go through this video today, is that next week we know is a weaker seasonal month. So I don't think anybody should be surprised at this point if the market is a bit weaker next week, but the silver lining of that is that July is a very strong seasonal month. So if it goes that way in terms of what the average is or what the probabilities are. Remember, in trading, it's always about the probability. There's no certain things, but we want to be aware of when there's higher probability of some things occurring, like weak seasonality next week and strong seasonality in July. So also we're done with all those gamma squeezes and so forth. So that to me makes sense why we could be a little bit weaker. But the positive is that it was really cheap to kind of put on some protection. I actually put on a little bit of protection for next week. I bought a Q put spread just for next week, about $7 wide, and it didn't cost me much. It cost me like $1.60. So I think that's really good risk to reward. It's good insurance for next week. I don't really want insurance past next week because of that seasonality factor. So I think for $1.60, that's not a bad way to kind of have a little bit of insurance just in case things go. I always start with these when I do these Friday videos, I always talk about the day first, and then I summarize what the overall week did. But some interesting outperformers for the day. Biotech, I think that was mainly Sarepta, was up about 30% for the day, so that really helped the XBI ETF. What I want to do is kind of go through some sectors too. So before I go through like a little bit of a quick sector review, just looking at where the S&P is. Fracture, a little bit of a fracture here. But again, like just putting things in perspective, the market has basically been straight up for the whole month of June, and that's pretty darn good. I talk a lot about how sometimes the first half of the month could be different than the second half of the month, right? It's rare when you get a whole month of really strong performance. Sometimes it's the first half, sometimes it's the second half of the month. So we basically got, 2+ strong weeks, and I think you kind of have to be happy with that. And at this point, you want to be making some adjustments with the market kind of stalling out a little bit. Obviously, we got very, very overbought. The RSI and the indices telling you that. Again, the RSI is very different, at least the way that I use it. When we get overbought in a stock, that's actually a pretty darn good thing. And a stock could stay overbought for a long time. That's not a sell signal. However, when the indices, talking about like when the S&P and the Qs, when those types of things get overbought, usually they don't stay, they don't stay like a 70, 80 RSI. They usually cool from that point on. So let's move over to the Qs, and then like I said, I'll go into some sectors, but yeah, it's the first time that the Qs is underneath the 5-day moving average. Again, why am I using like such a short-term moving average, the 5-day? Because it's really good for telling you if something is short-term, is trending in the short term. And the price has been above this 5-period moving average, so really strong trending move since the beginning of the month. So this is the first time that this is kind of a little bit of a fracture here. And is it the end of the world that if we do sell off a little bit next week? No, because I think a lot of names will kind of set up nicely. There are a lot of, even after the last 2 days, there's still a lot of overbought names. I also thought it was pretty interesting that we really didn't break the value area for the week. Right? I was ready to kind of short the Qs today. And there was the first hour of the trading session. We had a little bit of a fracture there, but price did not close in there. So this was really just kind of like a battle. So I think for next week, what you want to be watching, you could see this developing. Well, it's pretty much set now. This is the value area for next week. And you could see that if we, right around the same level, basically, this 479.50, the top of value for this week, is going to be the bottom of value for next week. So we break under that. And like, hey, you want to put on a reversion trade, maybe thinking maybe the Qs come into the 20-day moving average. I think that's not a bad trade. And remember, for me, the value areas, this is the market web's value areas that we use. All this is basically telling you is like it tries to take emotion out of the equation for you and can just set up easy decisions. So we go below 479.50. Sure, I think it makes sense for a short-term short in the Qs. If this doesn't break, then you know that there's just a lot of strength right now in the market, and that may be the only little dip that you get, right? But I can't tell you if the market's going to go up next week or down next week, but I've got a level to play it either way, right? That's what trading is about. It's not about making predictions. It's saying, hey, we break this level, I'm going to try a short. We hold this level and start to gear back up, right? I know I want to play it more to the long side. IWM, I'll talk about this briefly, but it seems like whenever I go through this chart, hey, if you can make a trade out of this, great job. You're you're awesome for doing so, because I see nothing but sideways here, and I see a lot of false moves, right? Not breaking really much to the downside, certainly not making a move to the upside either. Bonds also, we'll just look at really, they had a small week this week, not a big size move. Ultimately, still staying right around that bottom of value for the year, right? So remember, last week this closed inside value. This week it's kind of too close to call. And we'll see if that changes anything in terms of, the bond move. And I think that there's a decent amount of bond auctions next week. Let me just bring up my calendar. We could also talk a little bit about what's on board for next week. We've got things like consumer confidence next week, new home sales. And then, of course, at the end of the week, you're going to get another gauge of inflation. Remember, it's the PCE deflator. Folks always seem to get confused about this, because the same day that GDP comes out, which is, by the way, is a lagging indicator, you also get this core PCE number, and this throws everybody off. They're like, oh, is that the PCE number? Well, it's the core PCE price index for the quarter, but really what the Fed is most concerned with is the PCE deflator, which comes out the very next day and is usually the last trading day of the month. They're looking for a 0.0 for the PCE deflator. So they're expecting to see a very muted report for inflation. Again, I don't know how they set these numbers, but it is what it is. They're looking for 0.0. I mentioned bond auctions. Here's the government bond auctions. You're going to get the 2-year. You're going to get, so this is one of those weeks where you get 3 bond auctions. You're going to get the 2-year. You're going to get the 5-year. You're going to get the 7-year as well. So, we'll mention those. Those are all at 1 o'clock, for those days where there's bond auctions. And of course, there'll be Fed speakers, but it looks like there's not that many. Maybe they're on vacation. Could Fed speakers actually go on vacation rather than tell you the same thing that we've been hearing for 6 months? I don't know. We'll see. All right, that's my little joke. So I mentioned sectors. Okay, I'll start with XBI. I don't think there's really much that's changed here, even though there's a strong move here in XBI today. Maybe watch this top of value that's right around $92. I'll tell you what was interesting is the XLC ETF. We have to remember with this ETF, about 50% of this ETF is Google and 50% of this is Meta. So looking like, this looks pretty strong here. I didn't see that out of too many tech groups to close, right around the highs like that. So let's go right to what Google did today. First time Google has broken above. This has been very sleepy over the last month, right? This has not been one of those tech names that have been off to the races, just basically sideways. And if you go back a little bit further, remember on earnings, this thing gapped up to about 174. So this is a nice little play because it just really hasn't done that much. And if money wants to go into Google, it's not very extended considering that it's not too far away from when it reported earnings. Meta, on the other hand, right, is doing okay, but again, very sideways, right? Again, has not been where the momentum has been. I want to review another chart because again, Amazon, I mentioned, in the very beginning that, this was, look at the volume, on the open, that's where futures expire, and on the close, that's where the index rebalance occurred. So big volume. You'll see that basically when you're going through charts this weekend. Please don't get too overly excited about, oh my God, look at the volume that happened on Friday. You'll see big volume in just about every big name because of that index rebalancing. Also next week, the Russell rebalances next week. And it's not just the small caps. Remember, Russell also manages things like, they manage the growth and the value indices. And there's quite a bit of assets that are tracking those. Remember, always when there's an index rebalance, whether it's a sector, whether it's the small caps, whether it's the value versus growth, it all depends on how many assets are tracking those indices and those ETFs. The bigger the amount of assets tracking a particular ETF, the bigger the rebalance will be. All right. So just keep that in mind next week. So again, you'll think when you hear Russell rebalance, you think IWM, which is a big thing, but it will also be some large caps too, because Russell manages a lot of different indices. All right, so that's Amazon. Let's go back to this weekly chart. I did get long some Amazon today, right? This is another one too. You go back to when this reported earnings, right? It reported earnings, kind of gapped up, right? Had a little bit of a follow-through move. But again, if these things want to do something, this would be kind of exciting because they haven't gone up like, let's bring up the next chart. Everybody's favorite semiconductors. I got a lot of questions about the semiconductors today. My opinion is, where could they fall down to? Well, it could be the 20-day moving average. That would fill this gap in here too. That wouldn't be a bad thing. Why would that not be a bad thing that the semis come down to the 20-day moving average? Because it would take all those weak hands, all the hot money in the semis, and it would kind of, break that down a little bit. And I think that's better. Than basically all this hot money in the semiconductors. And again, I wouldn't necessarily look away from the semis. I would keep an eye on them. I'm still long Qualcomm, for example, right? I'm not, even though I took my profits in NVIDIA and was just basically watching this stock today, but the more this goes down, the more attractive it's going to be. So when you've been doing this for a while, like myself, have been trading for a long time, you get more excited and happy a little bit when stocks come in a little bit because they're not as extended, right? Look at the art, and I talked about just a minute ago about how stocks can stay overbought for a long time. Look at how long Nvidia was overbought, right? And same thing in here. But I'll tell you, this 20-day moving average, I'll put back my position on this. So again, like I will want to get back into, I just sold it yesterday. I sold some at 140, then I got out at 135 in my trading account. I'm still long in my long-term account because that's more of a long-term account. But I would love to see it back into the, one more day of sell-off, maybe into the 20-day moving average. And you'll have me very interested in this, right? And this did break into the value area. Also, like a downside move to the VPOC. That would also get me interested in it. But yeah, overall, I don't think this trend is going away from the semiconductors, but a pause here, I think would be really welcome and would provide another buying opportunity. Also, like names like, a little bit outside of semis, Arista Networks did really well, right? Another name that I'll be watching next week. What's the name I'm trying to think of? Pure Storage, but that's not the one that I'm thinking of. What is the name that I am thinking of? NTAP, that's the one. So Pure Storage is another one. Just Pure Storage is much more expensive, right? These are similar names, right? But look at this shallow, like NTAP barely even sold off, right? So, does it need to sell off? I don't know that it needs to sell off, but just interesting to see the relative strength in some of these names. Just getting back to the performance for the day, I want to go through, kind of interesting what happened with gold, because bring up gold. We'll bring up the ETF. Whoops, and that's the wrong one. Sorry about that. GLD funds. There we go. Yeah, I mean, could this be a head and shoulders that's developing? It could be. Remember, a lot of things look like a head and shoulders, but they're not a head and shoulders until they actually break. So I would be watching this 212 level, but again, it just really hasn't been a lot to trade here in the last couple months. Same thing with silver. Silver looked like it had something to it yesterday, but that's a nasty reversal back to the downside, filled this whole gap. So again, this is to me not a great trading opportunity here. I don't care how much call activity it sees. It's still a very difficult trade. And I put on a little bit of a PAAS trade. And I took it off today, even though it was just an inside day. Just too difficult, the gold miners and the silver miners. If you can manage to get a winner out of it, so be it. But I just view them very difficult. Then also Bitcoin. We'll bring up Bitcoin futures here. Still, like, this is difficult too. And this has just been trending down, right? Which also, like, if you're using this as a proxy for risk on, risk off, it's kind of giving you, I wouldn't say like a total risk off message, because it's not breaking down either. But certainly it has not done anything since the beginning of the month, right? And that's another thing. We've seen a lot of call activity in things like Coinbase, things like Robinhood, things like MSTR. The one that I continue to favor, and here's what Coinbase has done, like ugly in terms of like where you've seen a lot of call activity. Eventually, like you'll see a bigger bounce here, I think, but again, it's so much better to be watching the price action than just the call activity, right? You get call activity and and the price action also confirms. Perfect, right? That's a pretty good signal, but you have to have the two together, in my opinion. But everybody uses option activity a little bit different than I do. What I did like was the Robinhood chart today, right? Look at the nice candle here, right? Crunching into the 20-day moving average, bit of bullish engulfing here. So I really like that. So in any event, I just wanted to summarize that. Also our sectors. So here's how our watch list finished for the day, for the week, right? Obviously I add more names. I thought Kava was kind of interesting, right? This will be a name that will be on our watch list again. Notice how this thing kind of held in there, right? A little bit of a dip down to the 20-day moving average and it held. So that's not bad, right? Considering, a lot of things, not a lot of things, but some things breaking down a little bit. But Kava was not one of those names, and pretty strong, right? Interesting. Dick Sporting Goods was one of the best names. This is the name I was long last week, and I sold it on Friday just as a risk. I always sell some things on Friday for risk management purposes, but it was one of the better names. I could have held on to it. SMCI, we could look at this name too, and see where this closed out for the week. Had a nasty reversal yesterday, but it's still kind of hanging in there. It closed right at the top of value. So as long as these things kind of stay above the value area for the month, they stay on my watch list. So I'll continue to watch that one. Obviously, ARM was one that got really heated, but also back below that's 5-period moving average. First time it's done that for about a month. Reversal yesterday, but still kind of we'll keep an eye on this one. Also, a lot of things looked a lot different from where they were in the beginning of the week. I like this Teradyne too. Right, so this is kind of a Teradyne is a like semiconductor like testing company, but I have to say like this is not bad either. It kind of held in there. Not much volatility with this. Remember this thing really ramped up after it reported earnings, very, very strong, and again, not much of a pullback at all in that name. TTD stayed pretty strong too. Just to review some of these names, right? Not the biggest momentum name, but kind of holding that breakout for now. What else do we have? Spot also, I'm not going to review all these names. Home Depot did pretty well, right? It started to kind of look at consumer discretionary names as the week went on, and not bad, right? The other one out of this consumer discretionary, not exactly the same thing, but I'm also watching this Marriott, which broke above its value area. Again, not the best looking candle for the day, but still holding above those short-term moving averages. Let's talk about sectors for a minute, right? So I mentioned I'll go over that I would do a little bit of a sector review. So we could start with some of the strong names. I'll have a couple financials on the watch list for next week. Inside day for this, I think Goldman is compelling. Even though it had a little bit of a reversal bar today, we'll watch where it goes. JP Morgan, don't forget, these names are going to be reporting. JP Morgan did not get over the trend line that I was watching. So as I mentioned yesterday, we were talking a lot about rotations yesterday, but I said, hey, I don't have to jump into different names just for the hell of it. I kind of want to make sure that they're going to work. XLV, also looks interesting here. Where would I get long the healthcare ETF if it breaks above the June value area? That's 146.94. Just a couple other ones. I went over XLC already. I'll go over I'll go over both consumer discretionary. Again, what's the biggest weight in this? Well, it's Amazon. So not a surprise that consumer discretionary is perky after a good move there. Also, Walmart continues to push higher. Costco, another one to kind of look at here, right? I like weakness in Costco. I sold out of my Costco in my trading account. I think it was about a week ago. So a couple of red bars kind of get me interested. Maybe a test into the 20-day moving average would be great. But again, this has a lot of rebalancing type things going on too. So it wouldn't surprise me that this was just weak because some of the winners get sold and some of the losers get bought, right? You don't believe me? Look at Zoom Video. Right? Look at Zoom Video the last couple of days. Do you think there's anything new going on in Zoom Video? No, it's being rebalanced in the indices, and it's been an underperformer. So the underperformers have to get bought, right? And I explained that in today's TTG pre-market session. All right. I'll go over also XLP. Interesting as well. But I like consumer discretionary, and I like that healthcare chart a little bit better. Also, other sectors showing strength. The REITs, again, I'm not going to go through all of these. We went through biotech. We can look at software too. Not a bad recovery in software. Just when software looked like it was breaking down here, it's done nothing but recover, and pretty decent. Would I buy this chart here? No, I wouldn't, because it might fail over here. You'll see if it can actually break through this rather than make a lower high here. But I think nonetheless, Fairly interesting. And the performance for the week. Interesting to see what the best performing group was for the week, right? There it is, your gold miners. Even though gold was down for the week, the gold miners had a couple strong days this week and finished up 2.5% for the day. That was for the week, excuse me. That was your best performer for the week. Again, sometimes you find some surprises when you look at the performance for the week. Internet names, remember what's in those internet names, a couple things that we already talked about, which Google, Amazon look like they're trying to break higher. Those are must-watch names for next week. Consumer discretionary, which we already talked about. Telecom stocks, financials, those were all up over 1%. Even energy squeaked in there with up 1.1%, even though crude was down for the day. And then so you had a few areas that were like, oh, great, up over 1%. Look at some of the names that went, or some of the groups that were down. Solar was down 8% for the week. I mean, look at the difference between the solar ETF, right, which is this here, totally breaking down, right? I guess like a double top here, you could say at this point. Look at the break back below the 200-day moving average. Now look at First Solar, right? You want a pair trade. How about going long First Solar and short the solar ETF? That's not a bad looking trade. And if you want to look at the performance out of this, what a nice way to do it. Right. And here's First Solar versus TAN, right? Really, really nice, performance if you've been doing that, and almost taking out those previous highs. Other standouts to the downside, clean energy also, because there's a lot of overlap there. Chinese internet names continue. We haven't heard boo from from what's been going on in this group. Look at the VPOC takeout, by the way, to the upside, taking this out, and that was the kiss of death. This group has not looked pretty good. We have seen some call buying in names like PDD, which again, that could be a pair trade, right? Look at the performance of PDD versus KWeb. I thought it would be actually better than this, but it has outperformed, not as strong as I thought it would, maybe because PDD has pulled back a little bit too. Here's what PDD looks like. So interesting. This is also another one to watch, considering that they've been going after some calls in this name, and it's kind of short-term looking calls too. Home builders, they were down 2%. That's another. I didn't even show that group, but again, it's good to show the good with the bad. This one again is just not showing. Does not look healthy. After being a leader for a good portion of of the year leading up to about April. This is really breaking down. There's been a lot of weaker than expected housing data, which has been impacting that. Lennar mentioned that they're seeing some softness. Their new orders were a little bit shy of expectations. Biotech, even though had a really good day today, finished down 1.5% for the week. Utilities and semis finished down for the week, right? So again, some interesting performers for the week. I'll leave it there. Even though I think that weaker seasonality that I mentioned, I think there's also some good looking setups that might materialize. So I don't think that it's, again, I'm not going to make any major predictions, but I'll go with just what I think. I think that might be soft next week, but I think that might actually be good. But I don't think we're going to see huge downside. I think that you might see like more chop and maybe a little bit, to the downside. But ultimately, I think that will set up possibly for a really good July. Thanks, guys, for watching. And by the way, I will have a special Tribeca Trade Group special for the second half of the year. Stay tuned for that. You can email me if you want to know more about that. But I will announce that towards the end of next week. Guys, thanks for watching, and have a wonderful weekend. And stay out of the sun. You could see my office. I'm a little bit in the shade because downtown New York is pretty hot right now. So I've got the shades down. So apologize because a little bit dark today, but it helps to have the shades down today. Have a great weekend, everybody.